But you know what? Everyone is afraid. Everyone's afraid. And so they want to censor that the book can't read this book anymore. We read this book for the past 20 years. Girls read this book, but all of a sudden the book is traced and we're not reading it anymore. And we can't teach biology the way we were teaching it in the past. Can't teach, human reproduction. Can't teach that. Used to teach it in Bais Yaakov. Can't teach it anymore. And we can't at bas mitzvahs anymore. I assume it's a fear. We need to keep our daughters more sheltered in order to keep them from. But in Matana, I interviewed so many women for my book about their experiences in Bais Yaakov. And women who are part of the yeshivish community, women who are still from but aren't part of the yeshivish community, and women who are off the derech. And of those women who are no longer part of the yeshivish community, you know what not one of them told me? Not one of them said, I'm not from today, because
this is Listening to Understand, where sensitive Jewish truth seekers gather in a safe place for candid conversations on challenging topics. When we listen to truly understand and not in order to respond, we can replace judgment with curiosity and open our hearts to every Jew, regardless of their personal choices. As Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. I'm Matana. Let's get started.
This episode is in honor and memory of Matana's aunt, Dr. Rebbetzin Aviva Weisbord, Aleha Shalom, who passed away on Yud Aleph Tevet 4 years ago. In this episode, Matana sits down with Dr. Leslie Ginsparg Klein. Dr. Klein is the academic dean of Women's Institute of Torah Seminary and College, an Orthodox Jewish college for women. An accomplished scholar and author, Dr. Klein speaks on Jewish history, Tanach, leadership, and communication skills across the United States and internationally. Dr. Klein received her PhD from New York University, where she researched the history of Jewish girls' education in America and the Bais Yaakov movement. She is an alumni of Michlala, Stern College for Women, and the Wexner Graduate Fellowship, as well as a recipient of the New York Jewish Week's 36 Under 36 Award. Dr. Klein lives in Baltimore with her husband and children.
Thank you for joining me here, Leslie. I can say that you are a role model for me. I've been following you for a while. I remember when I listened to you, I'm like, oh my God, she has the same idea as me as keeping my maiden name, but for different reasons. You say you do it for Kibbud Av V'Em, right? And also for your profession, because people know you as your maiden name. And I love the fact that you said, I'm keeping my maiden name for Kibbud Av V'Em. And I told my sisters, we crave giving our parents nachas. We can't wait to call our parents and say, oh, this is what happened. And I said, isn't it addiction? Is giving our parents nachas an addiction? I love that part that you kept your name for your parents. And it shows a lot about you, that you're grounded with your roots and you're taking it forward.
People also ask me whenever I have Shabbos guests and they'll see my wedding bencher. My wedding bencher says the wedding of Leslie Ginsparg to Chaim Klein. And people will be like, why doesn't it say Chaim and Leslie Klein, like most ventures say? And I said, because that's not who got married. At my wedding, I was Ginsparg. So that is the name that should be on the bencher. Why do you have benchers, right? Whenever my parents would pull out benchers that didn't have the bride's maiden name, they would sit trying to remember whose wedding is this. If they were from the bride's side, if you're the groom's side, you know whose wedding it was. You're on the bride's side, you're trying to remember who married that. My parents paid for this wedding. Their friends are taking all these ventures. They should be able to pull it out in 5 years and know whose simcha this was.
Leslie, that's such a profound insight of who you are. Making sense and breaking the boxes that don't make sense. Leslie, just before we started, you said boxes don't work, right?
Boxes don't work.
They don't work. And you're like, okay, it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to do it differently. And that's okay.
Right.
When did it start that women took the husband's name?
Last names globally are recent. Maybe last names are, I don't know, maybe 300 years old, not even in some communities. I honestly don't know the answer to that, but it's fairly recent. And if you look in different time periods in history, they'll say times where a husband took the wife's name. Like if the wife's name was more prestigious, maybe took the wife's name. And there were famous cases of men, if their wife's family was supporting them, they took the wife's last name. I feel like today, and people change names right and left. And in Russian, you had brothers and sisters had different last names because your last name went according to, it was your father's name plus a different conjugation if you were male or female kind of thing at different points in time. And again, I'm no expert in this, but today I feel like we have this real attachment to our last names. And it's almost like comical or like silly because last names are so recent. And there were times in history that nobody cared about their last names. People changed their last names right and left. People changed their last names when they came to America. They changed their last names when they went to Israel. They changed their last names in different countries in Russia because they were trying to avoid the draft. And if you were an only son, then you didn't get drafted. So you'd have three brothers that all had different last names because they wanted to try to avoid the draft. There wasn't this kind of attachment. Like their last name wasn't a really, and I pray the way it is so attached to identity today. I think that's something that's much more modern.
And I also think that the world became much smaller. People are like, why'd you keep your last name, your maiden last name? I said, who would want to give up a Pupko for a Jacobs? I said, Ari should be proud that he married the Pupko dynasty.
Yeah, you have a rabbinic last name.
Right. So what's a Jacobs? Okay, there's so many out there, but Pupko is a Pupko. Right. So you don't want to give that up. And that's why I kept my name. I really kept it as an honor.
Totally. My last name is like an odd spelling. So if you Google my last name, first of all, you're going to get my first cousin, who is a physics genius. You'll get like a ton of hits of him. And you'll find me. If you Google Leslie Ginsparg, you're going to find me. There is no other Leslie Ginsparg in the world. Right. If you Google Leslie Klein, there's a ton of them. One is a CEO of a telecom company because I constantly am getting Google hits. There was a Leslie Klein that was arrested for, I don't know, drunk driving or disorderly conduct. Like, that's not me. There's only one Leslie Ginsparg. So I needed that. And also there were sounds like silly things. But even when coming up, Ginsparg is an easy Gmail to get. If you play with my last name, it's easy to get names of things.
Practically, it helps.
Practically, but Klein is such a common name. I don't ever assume I'm related to Klein. We're definitely not related to Klein's ice cream that I know of. That would be nice. Not related to Klein's tools. Not related to Calvin Klein. Again, not aware that we're related to any of the famous Kleins. We are related to a lot of Baltimore though, but not any of these famous Kleins. But if there's a Ginsparg out there, we're related.
That's cool. That's very cool. You grew up modern Orthodox. In this episode, we're going to speak about women leadership and education in the Orthodox community, maybe even the more right-wing Orthodox community. What you think, what is working, what is not working, and the wish list for Leslie as somebody that researched it a lot, that lives it a lot because this is what you do day to day, and you're a big dreamer, and we need more of you in the world. So we're grateful to have you. And I want to dedicate this episode to my Aunt Aviva, Zichrona Livracha. She was such a leader, but when the most, if you could say, a Jewish woman leader, like the ultimate. She was the bubby, the tanta, the always in the kitchen and always on the phone and always in a meeting. And everybody felt what she was exactly to them. Not a PhD dafka and not dafka somebody that led in leadership but she met a person exactly where they were. She had such humility. Malka.
She was a queen. She was a heroine. She was a brilliant woman. And she was someone you couldn't argue with. You couldn't argue with her. If she said it, then it must be like that. That's the approach we should take because she was so wise. She was really a brilliant woman. She was a role model to me as someone who I respected so much and whose perspective I sought on many issues. And when you first reached out to me, I didn't know who you were. And this moment you said you were Aviva's niece, I'm like, I'll do it. Yes to whatever you're asking.
It's impressive to know. I knew what she was to me, but the more we got older, everybody shared stories about Tanta Aviva. And then when she passed away, the stories of she saved my life. And she walked in the supermarket as if she was the ordinary person from the community. You never knew that
she dressed like an ordinary person.
And she would play on the floor with her grandchildren marbles. And she would sing songs with them. Like she would literally meet every person bimikomo. And you never felt like she was this giant walking around humans, which what she was.
She was 100%.
And I
what
think
she did in terms of education in this city, in terms of women's education, girls' education, special ed, what she did in terms of for Hana, for domestic abuse organizations, just incredible. And she was someone that all women all over the community were turning to. And we had someone came in and visited our school and started talking about Aviva. I was like, how did you know Aviva? There was just someone who was coming in from a different section of the community, and even outside of the Orthodox community, women knew her and recognized her and turned to her. And within the community, outside the community, she was just across the board within the city of Baltimore as a wise woman, as a tzaddikas, as someone who was really an Eishes Chayil.
Yeah,
all of the above. One of them, but a real Eishes Chayil. A real Eishes Chayil. Go through all the lines of Eishes Chayil. Check all of those things.
So what is an Eishes Chayil? What do you think Shlomo HaMelech thought when he wrote Eishes Chayil?
She was a multitasker, superwoman. She was someone who was involved in everything. In some ways, in the Eishes Chayil is a very what we think of as a modern woman, which a lot of times I really think is misunderstanding of history. I think there's this assumption that before like the 1960s, that Jewish women throughout history were housewives. They were never housewives.
Is that true?
Yeah, totally. First of all, the whole concept of a housewife is post-industrial revolution. In order to be a housewife, like a woman who is just home with her kid, raising kids, tending to the home, and not doing any kind of outside work, that's a modern concept. Because in order to have that concept of a housewife, then work has to not be taking place at home. And before the Industrial Revolution, work was at home. There was no divide between work and home. When you think about, did you ever read the memoirs of Glickl of Hamelin?
No.
Definitely read that. It's a woman writing her autobiography in the 1600s in what would be Germany. And her husband is in the jewels business, buys and sells jewels, precious stones, other kinds of things like that. Where's he doing work? He's doing work in the house. He doesn't have an office.
Right.
So people come and go in the house. She's also involved in the business. So no, Glickl Hamelin is not a housewife. First of all, she's wealthy. If anything, she's a household manager because she has a staff.
Right.
She has babysitters and cooks and cleaners. Like she has a staff. She's managing a staff. And she's also involved in the business. And when you think about, I was learning recently some of the Mishnayos I think it's in Ksubos, where they're talking about, okay, so the Mishnah's talking about whether a husband can cancel the sale of his wife's field. Like his wife sold her field. Right. Can the husband cancel the sale? And there's tons of cases involving this. And it depends on at what point are they in the marriage? Is it Erusin, Nisuin? Like at what point, do you want me to translate that? Just at what, the betrothal, but there's different stages of marriage and before someone is fully married, depending on the stage.
Once it was done very differently than it's done nowadays.
Correct. Like now it's all done in one shot, but it used to be that there could be months in between.
Or a year.
Right. So different stages. And also at what point did she take ownership of the field? And just when you're reading this, you're like, okay, so there were women doing business. The cases don't need to be all these different cases of women selling fields if women never sold fields.
Or did they get it from their father, not Slofchad?
Yeah, let's say they inherited a field. They were gifted a field. They inherited a field.
So they were in charge of that inheritance and taking it to the next generation or making money off of it. But it wasn't necessary that the husband took charge of her field because she got married.
There's a different type. That's whether it's like Son Barsa. There's all these different categories of a woman's property that she comes into and what a husband can make money off of. That a husband is entitled to the profits, whether it becomes the husband's property or whether the husband's entitled to profits from it, but the wife retains ownership of it. But you just see there's a lot of different categories and different ways that women were involved in business. Like I said, this is in the Mishnah, this is in memoirs. So Glickel's writing, this is obviously many years later, but there's so many places where you can see from the sources, from historical sources, both rabbinic and from Shilos and Shuvos, from different responsa literature, and also from different writings, Cairo Geniza. That women throughout history were very involved in business. Now, obviously, a lot depends on their wealth. But there's a family economy and everyone's involved in contributing to this global family economy and everyone is situated at home. The husband's at home, the wife is at home.
Oh, you're saying that Eshet Chai doesn't mean a wife at home. I think that's what you're trying to say.
Oh,
that an Eshet Chayil does not mean that she's a housewife.
I don't think anyone could read Eshet Chayil and think that's what that means.
Right.
But that you can't think that's what that means. Now, an aspect of the Eshet Chayil is someone who cares for her husband and for her children, and nobody would negate that by any means. But nobody would ever negate that, and certainly that's an important aspect, I think, of any woman's life, regardless the extent to which she's involved in the family, her involvement, whether or not she's working or not. But if somebody wants to be a stay-at-home mom, more power to her. Someone wants to work, more power to everyone. Every woman needs to make that decision for herself and for her family. And maybe that means different things at different times.
Yeah.
Maybe that means that kids are little and you have the financial. The reality is that I think I can count on one hand, maybe two hands, the number of women that I know that are my contemporaries that can afford to be total stay-at-home moms. And it's not so much a reality anymore of our society, just between expenses and this skyrocketing consumerism, between the two, it's not much a reality. And look, we just came off of Pesach, and that costs.
Right.
It costs a lot of money.
You know what my son said to us after Pesach? Isn't it crazy that we could have gone on a cruise from the money we spent on Pesach?
Yeah, I remember saying my husband and I went to one of these timeshare presentations. Like, we got a free vacation. It was like a very cheap vacation, but we had to sit through a timeshare thing. Like, never again. It was worse.
Right.
I'm like, please let me leave.
Yes.
What do I have to tell you? Just let me leave. I'm not.
Right.
And I remember we're like talking and they left us alone for a few minutes. With nice timeshares. And then if we weren't paying day school tuition and we weren't paying an Eruv tax on our house and we weren't
kosher food
and weren't paying kosher taxes,
right.
we'd have a lot of disposable income. Maybe we'd get a timeshare. But it's just not.
And you look at the average what you need in order to make it as a Jewish family of 3 to 4 children.
Right.
And an average non-Jewish family living in the middle of Iowa,
yes.
what they need to survive.
Yes. I once saw an episode of Love It or List It. I don't know if it's one of those home shows. They were playing it in the gym at the JCC here. They often are on like the home channel. And I was watching this episode and it's just like, this house is gorgeous. It's double the it's a nice house and it's a third of the cost. Where is this? It's in Kansas. Let's go, honey. We're moving to rural Kansas.
Exactly. And just what you need in order, the basics.
Right.
And that's why I think a lot of the culture is that both men and women of the family need to support.
Right. Oftentimes more than anyone wants to be, ideally. It's work. They don't call it work for nothing. But anyway, I also just want to say that I feel like a generation ago, and I think this is an important thing to mention, the women who were stay-at-home moms, they were very involved in the community. They were running organizations and volunteering, and we don't have that as much because women don't have the same time to volunteer. They don't have the time to devote to the cloud. It's harder to devote time to the cloud when you're working full-time and you're raising kids. But that there were, like, even when there was the ability to stay at home moms, many women were also using that time to volunteer and to contribute to the klal. And I think that's something that we've a little bit lost, both to working. And someone recently suggested to me that we've lost a lot of it to the self-care movement. That kind of this like Instagram culture of like me time. And it's, no, your kids are in school. That's not you time. That's contribute to the klal time. That's your volunteer hour. That's time you should be like volunteering. But I heard that from someone. I'm suggesting it actually, when I first heard it, I was like, what? And then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, you know what? I think there's something to say for that. There's less of a value put on volunteering and on.
But there's so much chesed going on. There's just a tremendous amount of nonprofits, chesed, like more than ever. And I actually think that a stay-at-home mom has it's much harder for her to find her recharge because she's expected to do so much more. My sister said to me, I go to work and I get to have my social time. So she's blessed that she works with people that she admires, respects. And so I can disconnect, and it's not all about what do I need to do at home for a few hours. Doesn't mean that the woman that goes out to work doesn't come home to 6 piles of laundry and multitasking. So they're both very difficult, but I think they're less admired, the ones that are staying at home, and it's hard.
100%.
It's really hard.
I agree with that. My mother was very involved in the community, and literally that was why now preschool goes until 4, but then preschool ended at 12. So all the time, my mom would pick me up, and then I would get dragged to some meeting.
Right.
And I remember sitting in so many meetings, so bored.
Wow.
But I sat and I was at many meetings.
Yeah. That's interesting. So what made you become a woman of leadership?
I think my mother was a role model of a woman who was a leader. I have always loved women's history and learning about different women from Klal Yisrael. And I don't think anyone's like, I'm complimented that you're calling me a leader. I don't think anyone says, I'm going to be a leader.
No, but to take a leadership, which means you're paving the road for others to join you on this journey. That's what I'm saying as a leader. Like a Simon Sinek leader.
So I think that, so one, having a lot of Jewish women role models that I was learning about, that I was reading about. I loved the book From Sarah to Sarah when I was a kid, written out of history, all these, I loved that stuff. I loved reading about Jewish women. So I think that was one element. And I think sometimes it's not a choice. Sometimes I wish that I could care a little bit less. I wish I could just be like, I think I'll just watch Netflix instead and just relax and like zone out. But that I can't, because there's an issue and it has to be addressed. There's a responsibility. I think it's just a sense.
So I just think you really have to become that woman that paves the way. And maybe as women, we see more of the need. We tap into it. We're more aware. We have these radars. I have a lot of women leaders that are my mentors. My first boss, which it's not my first boss, but the first one that I call her my boss. She was a widow, and she was such a woman leader powerhouse, but she was also like such a human. And all three of us, actually 4 sisters, 4 of us worked by her in different stages. And we call it the Rachel. Rachel would say, and she gave us these mindset ideas of, you could do it all. Just ask yourself what you want to do. And she would say, try it. And if it doesn't work, try something else. But keep on trying. And you could still be the mother and the caretaker and the wife and the friend, but be that creator. And I think it's a gift when we're surrounded by people like that, because a lot of people don't have that as role models. So you got it from your mother and people that you followed, a lot of women read about.
Yeah, and other people that I saw early on throughout my education, early on in my career, that I saw those women. And there were women who I owe a lot of gratitude to. Women who earlier on in my career gave me pushes, mentored me, gave me opportunities. Dr. Esther Schkupp, she was at the time the dean of the Blitzstein Institute, which is a women's college in Chicago. She hired me to teach. I was 23 years old. I was so young. I was so young. She was pushing me. She was like, the second you have your master's, call me, because she believed in me. If no one would have given me that opportunity, how would I have ever gotten that experience and known that was what I wanted to do? Within 2 days, I knew that was what I wanted to do.
Or as you said, believed in me and motivated me to pursue my dreams. So you might have been skeptical or not forthcoming of it. Taking a break for a few seconds to give you a quick announcement. If you haven't joined our Listening to Understand WhatsApp community, please do so now. There's a link in the show notes. We're going to be sharing more exciting stuff only for the members of the Listening to Understand WhatsApp community. See you there.
Karen Bacon at Stern, where I was a student, was such a role model and gave me leadership opportunities. Dean Devorah Ehrlich at Torah, who hired me. Dean Marion Stoltz-Loike at Torah, who also just gave me incredible opportunities, gave me a chance. I remember I asked her, I wanted an opportunity to teach a class in a different department, one in addition to what I was already teaching. And she said to me, that's not your department, you're in the other department. I asked her for a crazy opportunity. And she said to me, you don't have the experience. And I said to her, but I'm never going to have that experience if someone doesn't give me the opportunity.
I love that you were your own advocate.
But she gave me that opportunity.
Wow.
And then
but
she
if
said,
you would
okay,
never fight for it.
You have to ask. No one's going to ever hand you opportunities. You have to ask for that. But she gave me that opportunity. But she gave it. And then it worked out really well. But basically so I'll never have that experience. She said, okay. So I'm a huge proponent of women supporting women. There's all these stories in like secular culture about women like cutting down other women. And it's there's enough opportunities for all of us. We need to support each other and bolster each other and recommend each other for things, for good opportunities. I don't know that it's that men or women are more predisposed to leadership or not. I don't know if I believe that. I think the difference between men and women is that men taking a leadership role is more expected. And for women, sometimes there's a little bit more of a fight there of a need to prove yourself. Or I don't know if I'm thinking through this.
That's interesting.
You don't see that.
Not in my world, but I grew up very different. I grew up from a Pupko dynasty that my great grandmother was a leader. My grandmother,
Sarah Schneirer, she was an anomaly. She's an anomaly that she was a woman whose the leadership was all men. That she was an anomaly.
To fight against, but she had to fight in order to be the leader.
She had to fight in order to be the leader. But I think what makes her more famous is that she's unique. You don't remember the name of every man who was an educational leader in Europe.
Gosh,
because there were so many of them. It's not like there wasn't one man, there were so many men. There weren't so many women. And I think because of that, the women who are leaders stand out in a way more.
Because they're risking more and they have to fight against more. You're right. And also in the more culture, like the more you're in a culture, you have to break down the barriers of that culture if you want to create something else in order for it to be approved, because it has to be approved. So you're right. So let's go back to Sarah Schneirer. Let's go back to her. Why did you decide to do your dissertation on Sarah Schneirer out of everyone? You grew up modern Orthodox.
So I grew up modern Orthodox. I went to a Bais Yaakov, like a community Bais Yaakov high school, Tanach in Chicago. That wouldn't have necessarily been the best fit for me. Had I been in New York, I probably would have gone to like Central or Helb or somewhere along those lines. I'm trying the others. Or like you mentioned, Shalom, like somewhere like that. Somebody that was
a bit more modern Orthodox,
more middle of the road kind of thing. Right. But that didn't exist. And for various reasons, I thought that the all-girls high school was a better fit for me than the modern Orthodox co-ed high school. And so I ended up at Hannah Sachs, even though it wasn't like that was the obvious choice for me. But I don't think I was unique in that. I think that's very common in out-of-town community schools, that there's a much broader swath of who's going because there are less options. Mm-hmm. You end up somewhere. I did spend 4 years in the Bais Yaakov environment. And then I was a history major in college. And I was at Stern. And when I was thinking about, I remember taking a class in women's history senior year. And I really thought how education in the Jewish community is where everything in society is happening. That's where social change is happening. That's where socialization is happening. Like, we are an education-based society. So if you want to understand the community, you have to understand Jewish education. You have to understand schooling and education. That it's not just school, it's where culture is created. Our culture is centered in schools. Now, go do a search of books written on Jewish history. on Jewish education, like history of Jewish education I graduated in 1998. So I graduated college. Go look there and try to find me something written on women. Didn't exist. Didn't exist. Wow. It's like the entire Jewish education is male. And like all the books are written about yeshivos. There was just nothing written. Nothing written on girls' education. But you can't understand education if you're only focusing on 50% of the population. I didn't go straight to graduate school. I took about 2 years off, and then I went to graduate school, and I wanted to write about the history of Bais Yaakov in America and how it developed over time. So that's what I did my dissertation on, and that is what my forthcoming book is about. It's about the history and development of Bais Yaakov in America, but really focused on Bais Yaakov as a cultural institution. as a place where religious culture is developed, youth culture is developed, conceptions of gender and gender roles are developed.
Do you think
And
it's
of
a
course,
problem
Latnia's
that
culture.
oh yeah, absolutely. We had a
Can't
whole
talk about Bais Yaakov
episode with
without that.
bracha. With
Oh,
we had one
Bracha
of our first
Valikov, love
episode.
her.
Yeah, one of
Have
my
that
first
book right there.
episode.
Nope, right
Yeah,
there. Wait, can't look behind me. Right
reclaiming
there.
dignity, right there. Yeah. So the reason why one of my first episodes on this podcast, I have another podcast, but the reason why I wanted her here because a lot of my trauma was around SNEAS and the education of Bais Yaakov, ultra Bais Yaakov in Israel. And I felt it took me years to even realize how damaged I was from it. And
Right.
then the healing that came and still coming from it. Okay. But so I wanted, and when I read that book, I was crying. I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Oh my God, we need this. This was like oxygen for somebody that didn't have it. So I wanted to ask you, do you think it's a problem that the schools are creating the chinuch instead of the home? I remember Rabbi Orlowek is my husband's rabbi and he married us off. And every Shiloh we go to Rabbi Orlowek. And he says, don't forget that you are the mechanchem. Don't leave the chinuch for the school. And I think a lot of times the chinuch does happen in school. As much as we want it otherwise, our kids are in school 8 hours a day,
Right.
at least. How can it not be that? But is it creating a problem that the home is not the center of the chinuch versus we're gifting our children to somebody else to create what they're going to think, how they're going to, by their environment, by their role model? Is that a problem?
Yes and no. Yeah, there's a couple of issues here. Number one is that to a great extent, a lot of parents are afraid to parent and want to abdicate responsibility to the schools. Like in one of the mommy chats, right? Can the school just make a rule that kids aren't allowed to bring toys from home? Or just tell your kid no.
Yeah.
Tell your kid
Right.
no. Why does the school have to make a rule that you can't bring in? Why can't you just tell your kid no? But other kids are doing it. Okay, fine. Tell your kid no. So that I see actually much more profoundly in other places, much more significantly, where there's a failure on the side of parents to parent or like an unwillingness to have difficult conversations with kids. Like, rather there was just, oh, you have questions? Ask school. Don't ask me. Why not? Why shouldn't they ask you? So I do think that's problematic. I also think that schools are at times overstepping. There's, for a long time, schools have been making rules about what kids can do outside of school. I should really talk about this, but apparently this is a new policy that has now spread to Baltimore that girls are not allowed to have friends at their bas mitzvah parties. I think that parents need to decide how they want to mark the religious milestones of their children's lives. Like that is a chinuch piece. I learned with my daughter for a year up to her bas mitzvah. I learned for a year. When my own bas mitzvah, not only did I learn before my bas mitzvah, I had to take on this whole big chesed. My mother made me take on this whole big chesed project. It took hours of my time, which I a little bit resented at the time, but appreciate now. That was my mother instilling a value. And then that was celebrated at my party. Both the learning and the chesed element was celebrated at my party. And that was a way that my mother instilled certain values in me. And I took care to try to do the same thing in preparation for my daughter's bas mitzvah. So to think that a school would take that away from me and from my daughter.
And why are the boys allowed to have a bar mitzvah with all their friends and a girl not?
That's an interesting question. Maybe I don't know, but I can't answer that question. I can tell you that the message that gives is you're telling girls they're second-class citizens in Orthodoxy. That's what you're correct. You're telling them they're not important. That's what you're telling a girl. She's not important. So that is the answer to that question. Oh, so that we didn't intend that. So then consider those policies. And this is something that started off in East Coast, Lakewood, wherever else it started. But this is now spreading because there is this toxic conformity that one school does something, then all the other schools need to copy them. But we don't, God forbid, want our daughters to make decisions like they shouldn't want Aviator Nation sweatshirts or Aloe socks because that's what everyone else is wearing. But the schools are going to capitulate because that's what all the other schools are doing.
By the way, I just learned about Aviator last week.
Aviator Nation
what is
sweatshirt?
That? I'm like, what is that? My daughter's, it's a sweatshirt.
It's
an expensive one. She knew not to tell me for 3 years that she's dreaming about it. I'm like, okay, you're not getting it. unless you want to buy it on your own. We're not buying a sweatshirt, just like we're not buying a Stanley because everybody has it or whatever makeup.
Stanleys are literally the stupidest cups.
Exactly. But it just shows that it's just the TikTok or whatever is leading. Also,
it is what a friend of mine calls toxic conformity. That's what
exactly.
It's toxic conformity, and it's capitulating to materialism, and kol hakavod lach, that you say no. No, we're not getting it.
We're afraid. We're so afraid.
We're not getting the $300 sweatshirt, and we're not getting, but you know what? Everyone is afraid. Everyone's afraid. And they want to censor that the book, can't read this book anymore. We read this book for the past 20 years, girls read this book, but all of a sudden the book is traped and we're not reading it anymore. And we can't teach biology the way we were teaching it in the past. Can't teach human reproduction, can't teach that. Used to teach it in Bais Yaakov, can't teach it anymore. And we can't have bas mitzvahs anymore. I assume it's a fear. We need to keep our daughters more sheltered in order to keep them from. But you know, in Matana, I interviewed so many women for my book about their experiences in Bais Yaakov. And women who are part of the yeshivish community, women who are still from but aren't part of the yeshivish community, and women who are off the derech. And of those women who are no longer part of the yeshivish community, you know what not one of them told me? Not one of them said, I'm not from today because of what I learned in biology class. And not one of them said, I'm not from today because of a book that I read in literature. They said, I'm not from today. What were the reasons given? Shame. That they were shamed at some point in their education. They were made to feel shamed and embarrassed. That is the number one. Because of the way discipline happened in schools. Obviously, some have totally other reasons that relate to family type things, but you're talking about the ones who mentioned school, that's what they mentioned.
So much pain and so much healing needs to be
done.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
People's pain, people feeling shame and feeling embarrassed and feeling like they were screamed at, they were humiliated, things like I have stories, and I was trying to not start crying, listening to this woman talking, and you see the pain in their eyes over something that happened 40 years in my God, you see the pain.
Yeah. And this is not what Sarah Schneirer had in mind.
No, that's not humiliating. That's not what Sarah Schneirer.
So what did she have in mind when she started Bais Yaakov?
Bais Yaakov. So she had in mind that girls needed a way to connect. They needed that learning was a way of connecting, and that girls need an environment, connect to Hashem, to connect to Yiddishkeit. And there are aspects of that schooling today in Bais Yaakov today is still doing incredibly well. They needed a way to, there was no way for girls to connect. And she felt there's a term that Dr. Shani Beckhofer uses in her dissertation of spiritual liberation. Like they had nothing. And Bais Yaakov freed women to be able to learn, to be able to be Jewish. What Bais Yaakov gave was a way for girls to be Jewish, to be proudly from in the modern world. That they didn't have that. They didn't have it before. They had a way to be proudly from in the modern world. First of all, girls were very exposed to modernity in many ways. Both men were also exposed, but girls and women in Eastern Europe tended to be more exposed. And there was no kind of framework. In Western Europe, you had Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, who developed a framework of being frum in modern times. They didn't have that. So what is being frum to them? If you read sometimes some of the memoirs of women at the time, their lack of knowledge is astounding. Things that they believe. If you read Rachel Kalof's story, and she's writing the things that they didn't know. I don't know if this was a custom in some places in Europe, but she got married in America, and she had a very European mother-in-law, and she basically had a dektichel over her face the entire wedding, the whole wedding. She wasn't allowed to see anything. And the things that her mother said, so clearly her mother-in-law knew something about Taras Mishpacha, but her explanation of why her husband couldn't physically share a bed with her after she gave birth had something to do with demons, shadim.
Really?
And yes. And she started having a little bit, I think, postpartum depression, and started thinking that shadim were coming to grab her baby. It really was a bad situation. But the lack of knowledge was astounding. There wasn't a means to differentiate between halacha, between minhag, between folk ways, between superstition. because it was just you're learning things informally. It's how did it. Okay. On the flip side, okay, they're going to public school. They are secularly educated. So they're studying secular subjects from a very intellectual, rational perspective. And their knowledge of Judaism is some combination of like folk religion. And it had no intellectual basis. They didn't know anything.
I feel like they were lacking spirituality. They had the technical and they were like intellectual spirituality and understanding.
They were lacking that. And there are different times in history where women had more or less learning. Like again, Glickle of Hamelin, extremely knowledgeable. She was extremely knowledgeable. You see throughout her book. She's talking about halacha. She's quoting Mamarei Chazal. She's clearly knowledgeable. Other women are clearly not. And again, Glickle of Hamelin was wealthy. So she had private tutors. That was something that a person who doesn't have that kind of wealth is not going to have. But
Sarah Schneirer just said, let's give them the gift of education.
Right. So then you're so fine.
So she did education and community together in a Jewish way.
Correct. And environment. Girls had an environment. When you think about part of the reason, there's two things I want to say. So just getting back to that, the informal education. So there's a disparity between their knowledge of secular subjects and their Jewish subject, which suddenly makes Judaism seem archaic and old-fashioned and silly. And for what?
Right.
For what? And then Sarah Schneirer came from a Hasidic community. Friday night, all the men in the family are off Kabbalah Shabbos, singing, doing whatever they're doing. Maybe the Rebbe's there, maybe he's not. But what are the girls doing? Nothing. And Shalashudis time, right? They're in Shul, Mincha Mariv, singing, this and that. What are the girls doing? Nothing. Come Yantif. They're going to the Rebbe's town to spend Yantif with the Rebbe. Some of them, they'd be gone from before Rosh Hashanah through Sukkot. What are the women and girls doing? They're just home.
Wait, but that's happening today.
What, with men going to Uman?
No, I'm saying in general. The men go to shul, and what are the women doing? Taking care of the children or the girls at home?
No,
I don't see it any different today.
Totally. That's what Bais Yaakov did.
In the Hasidic world. I'm saying in the Hasidic world, they still go to Tish Friday night. And what's a woman doing?
Okay, but I don't think most women are being, let's say, left alone for 4 weeks throughout.
Oh, you're saying that. Okay.
But what you mean? They went to school. They know something on their own. They want to they can daven. Women didn't know how to daven. They can daven. They can daven also. First of all, they can go to shul. Women couldn't single girls couldn't go to shul. They can go to shul now. You want to go to shul? You want to get together with your friends? Get together with your friends. But you'll see what Bais Yaakov did. So they started to have these youth group meetings. So Sarah Schneirer goes to a meeting Friday night of this Zionist youth group. She's invited by like a cousin of hers. And the girls are being Machal Shabbos and saying all kinds of kfira, heresy. And she's aghast. Bais Yaakov, Sarah Schneirer herself led Kabbalah Shabbos at the Bais Yaakov Seminary. They're all gathering together. They're gathering together and they're davening together Friday night and they're singing. And then you have Benos, right? Benos was an outgrowth of Bais Yaakov. So you go to Benos youth group Shabbos afternoon. So when your father and your brothers are going off to the Stiebel, so you're going to Benos and you're having this gathering time together with your friends. So what Bais Yaakov did was create a means. So first of all, so what do you want to do Friday night? You can learn. You can learn because you know how to learn. You can say Tehillim. You can daven because you know how to read and you know how to daven. So you have your own means to connect. You don't need your husband and brothers to connect. You have your own spirituality. You have your own way to connect. You're not dependent on them the way women pre-Bais Yaakov, they have it. Obviously, again, there were exceptions, but that was the issue with the Hamon Am, with most of the population that Bais Yaakov was addressing, was that girls and women had no means to connect. They didn't have the knowledge. They didn't have the ability to learn. They had nothing. They do none of the intellectual basis for Yontif. I don't go to shul now. I don't need to go to shul. I still have a very spiritual Yontif, even though I'm not going to shul.
100%.
I know what the Yontif means. I know what Yontif is about.
Right. So what year was this? What year did she
start? Bais Yaakov, 1917.
1917.
It really takes off in the 20s. Well, that has a lot to do with Agudas Yisrael, which helped expand in the 20s.
When do you think the biggest change happened in the Bais Yaakov movement to become more ultra Orthodox and focused on tznius.
So that's not a change in Bais Yaakov. That's a change in Orthodoxy.
Culture?
Yeah, that's a change in Orthodox culture. Bais Yaakov has followed Orthodox culture. What's the biggest thing that happened? The Holocaust happened. The Holocaust destroyed Bais Yaakov as it was, along with destroying pre-war, interwar Europe, and the Jewish community in Eastern Europe's destroyed. So Bais Yaakov is going to be reinvented in Israel, following Israeli Haredi cultural norms, and in America, following American Yeshivish cultural norms. So
Did it start in Israel before in America? Like it went Europe, Israel, America?
No, it's concurrent. They're separate. People made aliyah and started schools, and Sarah Schneirer was writing letters to Israel about the importance of Bais Yaakov, like in the 30s. And people came from Europe to America and started around the same time. So it really starts at the same time, and it starts on different trajectories. There's no connection. There's no like formal connection between Bais Yaakov in Israel and America. There's no formal connection between Bais Yaakov, one school in America and another school in America.
Right.
They're all independent.
But maybe that's okay, Leslie. Maybe Bais Yaakov is basically
a reality of America.
School. It's a community school that fits the needs of that community.
I think that's 100% how it should be. I think that each Bais Yaakov school, it's 100% how it should be. It should fit the needs of that community. So when we talk about a girl not getting accepted to, let's say, a Far Rockaway school, right? That makes me ill. That makes me ill.
So let me ask you. I know it also
that literally, when people say, "Oh, Sarah Schneirer would be rolling in her grave," you can't put conceptions of the past on the present. Sarah Schneier's Bais Yaakov was a product of interwar Poland. In many ways, it was a Kiev school. Okay, it's a product of interwar Poland. It's going to be what's going to be. Oh, the American school is so different than Poland. Obviously, because 21st century America is different than interwar Poland. What would Sarah Schneirer think if she saw this? What does it matter? She was living in a different time period. What does it matter if she would have done it? So
I think they're saying, what were her core values?
As a historian, I always am reticent to say what I think someone from the past would say about the present. The one exception is the rejections, because Sarah Schneirer, part of her raison d'etre was no Jewish girl left behind.
That was her slogan to the school?
No, that's no child left behind. It's an American education motto.
But you're saying her mindset behind it was, it's Project Inspire. Anybody that wants to get inspired, come to us.
What made Bais Yaakov different from other schools was mass schooling. There should be Bais Yaakov in every town. Every girl should have the ability to get a Jewish education. So why does it make you like go crazy? Absolutely crazy about the fact
that
if you go on like
I agree with you. Right. I'm playing devil's advocate. Because if people are saying it's a community school, this is the hashkafa of our community. We don't want to let the girl go to a different hashkafa school that she fit hashkafa.
So if
now it's not 3 girls, it's 30 girls in a class, not 4 girls in a class.
So if every city had a VAD that would, before school acceptances went out, made sure that every girl was accepted somewhere, I would have no problem with it. But what you have a reality is that acceptances go out, and there are 13-year-old girls and boys, also 13-year-old girls and boys who got a rejection letter from everywhere they applied. Can you imagine the spiritual damage that does to a kid? That nobody wants them? That nobody thinks they're good enough for their school? I want to tell you something. The people who they're going to have to answer for this. It's murder. It's spiritual murder. Yes. How can you do that to a child? How can you do that? It's spiritual murder.
I can't agree more. I can't agree more with that. And part of the reason, I would say part of my trauma from youth, I went to the Yashan. Before it was like the original Yashan, that we call them the guards that would stand side by side entering the school, and they would look us up and down and pull us out, literally like Nazis, pull us out from the line, go home, go to the principal, too long. Your skirt was too long. Your skirt was a big skirt that came to the ankles. You're going home. You're wearing a white sneaker, go home. Your ponytail is too low, go home. You're wearing a scrunchie, go home. You're wearing earrings that are a little bit too long, go home. So I get it. But at the same time, I want to play devil's advocate here just to understand. If we're saying we're mass producing now. It's not what Sarah Schneirer. We don't need Project Inspire in Far Rockaway at the moment because we already created the communities. They're educated. Our parents are educated. We don't need that. So maybe we need the place for each student to be where they belong, that they don't feel, oh, these kids don't belong here and they'll be the mashpia, whatever they want. That like they don't want those kinds of kids in the class. And they're saying it's the parent is saying, I want to send the kid to the school, but the kid doesn't fit the school narrative and they're going to be destroyed there. So what do you say to that?
Okay, I say 10 different things. Number one is, why is there any reality that a kid is being destroyed in a school? That's number one. Number two is sometimes the criteria are ridiculous. What the admissions criteria, they're elitist.
Yeah.
They only want the quote unquote best. And they have an arbitrary, somewhat arbitrary definition of what best is. But the messaging is, you're not good enough.
You're right.
You are not good enough. Yep. And there's something incredibly crumb about that. That's just not Jewish. Even talking about in America, Rebbetzin Kaplan, she regularly accepted students who were not, quote, al pi rufenu, who weren't according to our values, because there was an achrayus. There was an achrayus. There was a sense of achrayus. You have to actually, this is a Yiddish neshama, you have to educate it. But there isn't that achrayus anymore. There's an elitism. There's like an Ivy League mentality, which is so not a Jewish value. An elitism. You're not good enough. And again, if a city makes sure, if all the principals get together before the admissions go out, and ultimately who's not accepted anywhere, and everyone has to take some of those students so that they should get an acceptance, okay, you've taken care of your problem. And it used to be, that's how it was in many communities, and it's just not anymore. And I remember the week on social media, we have all these parents posting like in tears that their kids weren't accepted anywhere. And this isn't just in the Haredi world. And it's in the modern Orthodox world as well. And it's not just in girls, it's in boys also, but it's vicious. It's vicious, it's cutthroat. I feel one of the things that I love about Baltimore is that the girls' schools are K through 12. So you don't have to apply to high school.
Oh, wow.
I can't even imagine the trauma. And I see it with our students. I see it like there's trauma about applying to high school. There's trauma about getting into summer camp. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Can't get into summer camp, to sleepaway camp. Trauma about getting into seminary. And when you talk about parents abdicating Sina, there's nothing like the abdication of sending to seminary when you have absolutely no idea what they're teaching for 10 months. And there are many seminaries that are excellent institutions and are real schools. And there are seminaries that are run like businesses. And you don't know what's going on.
And it starts in high school, the relationship between schools and the seminaries. Who are we feeding?
Right. They have to get a spot in that. Their whole lives are like this anxiety of getting a spot, of getting in.
Yeah.
And it's like, why? And then we wonder why our kids are so anxious. We've created a reality where they're constantly fearing rejection because we've set all these goals and set this. Everybody just wants the best. You didn't get in, you're not the best.
Yeah, but Leslie, it happens also going to Harvard, Yale. Am I gonna get accepted to these Ivy? There is some kind of a culture, like in life,
it's not a culture.
But the problem is, what I think is that we connect how good you are to spirituality, and then we lose the connection to Hashem.
Right.
It's not how good you are in life and in business and education, how book smart are you or whatever. It's how I'm gonna sum you up how good you are between you and God and religion. And the turnover or the child was rejected from the society that's going to tell me if I'm a good Jew or not.
Right. And every school is saying, I'm not a good Jew. Because if I were a good Jew, I would have gotten accepted.
And I think we're creating robotic Jews in these schools. In order for you to be a Eved Hashem or a Eshet Chayil, this is what you're going to need to look like. I want to just make this point because it's very important to me. If we're sending our children in order to get Jewish education, and they're there multiple hours during the day, probably more hours in school than at home besides weekends, and we want to give them the Jewish education and all that, and they're being taught that at school, but then they're being put into this is what you should be, this is what you should wear, this is what you should look like, this is what you should strive for, this is profession you should go into, this is what you should love, this is what you should aspire to. What part of it is like, oh, wait, where's the relationship with God? Where's the big questions of what is it to be a Jew? What are the challenges of being a Jew? Challenging the question about a Jewish identity. If it's so cookie cutter in the schools, how can we find ourselves within Judaism and the relationship with Hashem? We're so afraid.
I spoke to a very wise woman who is a Bais Yaakov teacher for my book, and she talked about how much of education today is performative. We want students to look a certain way and act a certain way, and if they do that, then we're a success. But it doesn't really mean anything if things aren't internalized. All I can say is that some schools do this better than other schools, and that is a big place for parents and chinuch, because the only place they're really going to learn that about how the challenges, how to negotiate challenges is from you. That's going to come from parents. I think we can't abdicate. We cannot get that word out. We cannot abdicate education to the schools, us as parents, and we shouldn't. But let the school teach what the school can teach, and there's going to be a deficit, and you, the parent, can make that up. But you, the parent, have to do it. And you have to do it. But you know what? It's scary. It's scary. But then we're afraid to say the wrong things. But there is no right answer and there is no wrong answer. You just have to be honest and open with your kids. You can talk about how you've dealt with your own struggles. But the most important things, I don't know the kids so much. And again, this is something this same wise woman told me, that kids so much need answers as much as they want to be able to express the question and feel heard.
100%. I always say, I don't know if this podcast will give answers, but at least we give a place for the questions, because part of the healing process is being heard, talking about it. When I got married, and on my other podcast, I talk a lot about my early ovarian failure and how Nida was my absolute nightmare of my marriage. I hated mikvah because I'm OCD. And I had this anxiety about it, but no one was talking about it. Oh, mikvah is so beautiful. You should look forward to it. No, for me, it was a nightmare. Of course, I came back to a loving husband, but I was traumatized for 2 days beforehand, and the anxiety leading up to it was hard. What kind of a person am I coming back? A wreck. For me, hair covering was always a hard thing because I have sensory. I couldn't have things on my head. When I stopped covering my hair a few years ago, it was just literally a choice that I just said, I can't do it anymore. It was just too hard for me. And I said, you know what? I hope Hashem understands. But I didn't even know. So I went to Jessie Fishbein. I don't know if you know who she is. She's a Talmidah Chachama. And I said, can you teach me about hair covering? Mina Tanach. I didn't even know. I just knew that Isha Sota porim et Sarosha. That's what it is. If you uncover your hair, you're like Isha Sota. That's what it is, like literally. And there was an education about it. So I felt like, oh, at least I have somebody I can speak to about these things. And I think a lot of times there's no answers.
A lot of times there are no answers. But just to be able to speak the question and express the complexity takes a load off of you.
And I don't know if Bais Yaakov invites that as much as modern Orthodox schools do.
You know what? I think that every school has what they're comfortable talking about and what they're afraid to talk about. And if kids start asking the questions that they're afraid to talk about, then it gets very dicey for the kid asking the question.
I think it was my daughter that one of the teachers were talking about piercing. And she said, doesn't it say that Rivka had the nezem and whatever?
Yes, it was piercing. Yes.
And she didn't want to, we're not going to talk about that.
Why not? Do you know what just happened? The teacher just created an issue where there wasn't one before. Yeah. Because now, what does everyone know? Why won't she talk about it? Because I'm afraid that if I talk about it, then my students tomorrow are all going to get nose piercings, and then they'll be off the derech.
And why are we relating nose piercing to off the derech, by the way? Like, why, right? Why are we connecting those two? Where did it start?
There's the theory. If we mention it, that everyone's going to run and get nose piercings tomorrow. And then obviously, if they have nose piercings, they have 1 foot off the derech.
Right. So I think as what I'm getting out of this is that as much as schools educate, we have to really bring the derech at home.
100,000%.
And repair a lot of the damage that might happen there.
And also, parents need to speak up and be advocates for their children's education. I cannot tell you, every time I hear from a parent like, oh, I'm so upset about this rule that the school made. Did you contact the school? No. What do you think's going to happen then? The squeaky wheels are the ones that get heard. If there's something that you don't like, there's something that's going wrong, there's something that you feel is negative chinuch. So respectfully express that. Schools need to hear the perspectives of parents. And when they're only hearing like one section, so they keep responding to that one section of the population. And then that section of the population is getting everything they want when 95% is upset about it, but keeping their mouths shut. That's politics also, the silent majority.
I feel like we feel as a parent, we don't get heard. Like
we don't get heard.
We don't get heard. I had an issue.
You don't get heard. You don't get heard. Somebody's getting heard. Just might not be you.
Maybe.
But that's a problem. That's a problem. Someone is getting heard. Question is why schools listen to the people that they listen to. I don't know the answer to that.
And I really think that like the difference between the hashkafa in the house and in the school, there's sometimes such a gap, and it creates an identity crisis for the child. And maybe the school is taking over too much of hashkafa.
I think that's a hard question to respond to because that's always going to be yesh b'yesh. That's going to depend on the school and the situation. But the reality is that, especially in communities where there aren't a lot of choices, there's going to be that discrepancy. So I think that the parents need to respect the schools, or the home needs to respect the school, and the school needs to respect the home.
Right.
And have mutual respect. And when there's mutual respect, there's no problem. I went to a high school that did not match my home, did not negatively impact me because core values were there, even if the manifestation were different. And when there's also something to respecting the school, but knowing this might not be what we do, but we're still going to be respectful.
I tell that to my children. If we decide to go to a school, and if they call it sneas, it doesn't matter. If they say cover your knee, cover your elbows, and whatever they're telling you to do, you have to do it as a school rule because we decide to send to that school. Right. Whether it's a nua or not, that's a completely different thing. And I think we need to make such a distinction between school rules and sneas because they get so gray. And you can never take the Bais Yaakov girl 20, 30, 40 years into, and there's still that trauma of, was it a school rule? Was it sneas? And what is it?
That's something that I wrote about in my essay in Reclaiming Dignity. That point that there are school rules. So let it be a dress code. Let it be a dress code. And if you broke the dress code, you broke a school rule. Not that you broke a dress code and therefore you're not sneas, you're unsneas, you're a bad person, any of that shame attached to it. You broke a rule. You broke a rule like there could be a rule you're not allowed to chew gum. You broke a rule. So there's a consequence for breaking a rule. The other piece you reference also is that I talk about how every school should have a greeter. That's really nice to have greeters at the door, okay, when girls come in. And every school needs to have an enforcer. There needs to be that person on staff who enforces the rules.
But they should never be the same.
Never the same person.
Oh my God, yes, never.
The greeter and the enforcer should never be the same person.
Oh, amen.
Ever.
Amen. Amen.
The last thing everyone wants is elevator eyes when they're walking in the door. They want to just be greeted and feel like the school is happy to be there and feel that welcomeness. We talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but we also need to inspire more of our best and our brightest to go into chinuch and to be the role models for the next generation. It's a profession that has gotten way too devalued in our society, where we are judging who's the best based on their money-making potential. Yuck. Okay, yuck. That's not what we believe. And we need to bring back both prestige and teachers also need to eat.
I feel like teachers need to get paid more, and it should be a priority. They need to get paid more because they do such a hard work with such avodat kodesh, and they do multiple jobs, overtime, underpaid, undervalued. And
every time I see another building going up, I just think, gosh, how many teachers' salaries should be paid with this?
Right?
How many teachers could have gotten a raise? Yeah, but we're losing our talent because we've put too much value on earning potential, and therefore we were losing men for ages, but we're losing women, and we're losing our moros, and there are teacher shortages right and left, and it's a crisis that we have created. We created a crisis.
By what? By paying them less?
By paying them less, but not you're right, by not paying them enough. By not paying moros specifically, by not paying them a livable wage, and also by telling girls who are dating that you're not going to get a great guy if you're a teacher because you won't be able to support as well as someone who's in computer science. So you get all these girls who want to be teachers, who want to be mashpios for the next generation, And they end up, instead of a classroom, they end up behind a screen. We've done this.
So what's the answer to it, Leslie?
The answer to it is to return giving the message, which Sarah Schneirer and Visma Kaplan strongly said, that there's no higher or holier calling than chinuch. Okay, look, if you're not cut out for it, please do us all a favor.
No, bemet. No, some teachers should not be teachers, but those that are gifted,
so many who should be teachers aren't. I have students where I'm like, you're going to chinuch, right? No, I wanted to teach, but can't support with that. So I'm going into XYZ field and I'm crying. Why? You're natural. And you want to teach, but you're being pushed out of it. You're being pushed out of it because you believe you won't get a shidduch. What's wrong? Literally.
But not only that, but it's a shidduch, and how will I pay my bills?
And
it's two sides.
It is. It's a two. But for the immediate thing that I see is
the message before you were even married, like, who's gonna marry me if I'm a teacher? Do you really see it a lot?
Yeah, I do. It's heartbreaking.
I thought it was only in Israel. I really thought it was only in America in Israel
too, and it's heartbreaking. And where there is a little bit of truth is that we have all these women and men who dedicate their lives to chinuch. They're not respected. They're treated like garbage, and they're not paid. It's so double-sided. On the one hand, it's so wrong to not encourage people into chinuch, and on the other hand, what are we doing to support them once they're there? What are we doing as a community to make the field more attractive, to make it more attractive? So there's two elements here.
How do we do that, Leslie? Having a conversation. What can we do?
Communal allocations, where people choose to give their tzedakah, your American tzedakah. It's about, I once gave more to a campaign because they said, every penny you give will go to teacher salary. And I said, oh, okay. Then I'll give more. Because I want some teachers to get paid more. You telling me that's what it's paying for? Yeah. The other is a cultural change. It's so hard to change culture. Teachers aren't respected in secular culture either.
Right.
Used to be, but they're not anymore.
Yeah. It's so sad.
It is sad. So it's about a culture change.
Because also our kids are there 8 hours a day.
Right. We've abdicated our chinuch and then to people and we don't care about who becomes teachers, and we don't care. And schools are so desperate they hire anyone with a pulse. Even if they don't have a pulse, they'll hire them. This is a recipe for disaster. So then we have kids who are bored in school and unhappy because they don't have teachers, and then definitely they're not going to want to be educators. Right. So I think there's communal elements that need to be addressed, but there's also personal elements. If you have a child who's of dating age, so don't say no to someone because they're in chinuch, and encourage your child to not have that value. There are things that there are things that communally need to be done, and there are things that we can individually do. We can choose where to donate our money, and we can choose the messages that we give to our kids. Even the way you talk to your child about your child's teachers are going to impact their perception.
Right. It's so true. So you're saying start with
if you talk about your child's teacher's an idiot, like what do you think your child's going to think?
Right.
So many times I see that the problems are created by parents. My daughter comes home from school. Oh, did you know that so-and-so is XYZ years old? Why is that relevant? What parent told their kid how old their teacher was?
Wow.
Why? Who'd that come? That came from the parent.
Wow.
A lot of the teachers are young. So what? So they're young and enthusiastic, and that's great. Or a teacher is old and has a lot of years of experience. Either way, it was said in a derogatory manner, and clearly this was a kid over the parent saying something. Do you
believe that the education system in general is going to change just because people are acquiring knowledge from online, AI, so Google? Like, my kid's going to ask Google anything. Like, it's so easy to access information.
Not always right.
But I'm saying, do you think it's going to continue staying in the classroom structure?
I don't think school structure is going to change so long as schools also need it as childcare. The classroom, how things are taught, are going to change. AI is a brave new world. I can't ask. I'm a historian. Ask me in 10 years.
Right.
I cannot tell you now. Ask me in 10 years. Ask me in 10 years. I don't know how AI is going to impact writing. The fact that you can ask AI to write you anything, although I can recognize AI. I think a lot of people can recognize AI. There's a certain tone to it that screams this was not written by a human. But AI is going to get better and better. I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know. Ask me.
In 10 years. Okay, we'll write that down. So, Leslie, if there was one thing that somebody hired you from, let's say somebody came from somebody high up in the Jewish education and said, okay, Leslie, we want to hire you to see the top 3 problems in the education, and we're going to sponsor you to change it. What would be the first thing that you will put all the money, resource, energy into changing in the system, in the Bais Yaakov? I'll start Bais Yaakov system.
Oh my goodness, that's such a hard question to answer.
What's your pet peeve?
I have so many pet peeves. There's so many things that are done well. There's so many things that could be done better. I think there's a lack of clarity in the purpose. I don't want to answer this in Bais Yaakov. I want to answer education globally.
Okay, fine.
I think there's a lack of clarity in the purpose of the curriculum. And because of that, it loses meaning, because it's like, we're doing this because this is how we've always done it. It's not a reason. It's not a reason. I think the admissions issue, that's not a person issue in my community, but I think the admissions issue is huge. It's a massive problem. And probably teacher recruitment and salary are probably like major issues. I think a lot of other issues would be, there's a lot of issues that, again, it's different from school to school. There's schools that have the decision-making process is problematic. What we talked about, parents not really having any kind of involvement is a problem, especially mothers. Mothers have within the right laws, have no involvement in their boys' education, and half the time, no involvement in their girls' education. The lack of that piece are all issues, but I would say that the world is changing, and one of the messages of Bais Yaakov is that you always need to meet that challenge head on. You can never just relax and say, we've done it. We're done. This is how we do it.
Evolving.
It's always evolving. And if we as parents and educators refuse to confront the challenges of modernity and to continue evolving, we are failing our children.
We're walking into a wall.
Yeah, if we operate on the mentality of this is how it's done, therefore this is how it has to be done, we're failing our children.
We're not preparing them for life. We're not preparing them.
Exactly.
Right. If there was someone you could meet from history, I'm going to take Sarah Schneirer out of there because
it wouldn't be Sarah Schneirer.
Oh, who would it be, and what would you ask them?
Sarah Bais Yaakov. Hands down, not even a question.
And what would you ask her? Why she sang that song?
You were at everything. You were an eyewitness of everything. How did it happen? She saw everything.
So you would want to write down, as a historian, you want to take down from
want
the eyewitness.
You're a woman who lived through it all. She lived through it all.
I love that. As an historian, I get why you would just give me content, give me facts.
Right.
Leslie, thank you for what you do.
Welcome.
Thank you for being a role model. Thank you for inspiring me. And I hope our paths will cross. And I hope you create these changes in the world. Bezrat Hashem.
We all need to work for it.
Okay. Take care.
You too.
Thank you for listening to Understand. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please hit that follow button on your favorite podcast app. This way you don't miss an episode and you help us grow. You are part of our growth. We appreciate your support and we hope you choose to listen to us on our next episode. We'd love to hear from our audience. If there's anything you would like us to research, to talk about, please contact us on our website, listeningtounderstand.com. And if there's any insight that you got from this and you want to share with others and you are happy for us to read it out loud on our show, send us your insights. Send us your thoughts. We want to listen to understand. Bye till next time.